previous episode, I looked at how patriarchal systems shape the structure of power in many societies. And in this episode, I want to talk about why women are speaking up now, and why this is feeling so disruptive and uncomfortable for a lot of people. One of the things we often hear is the phrase, women didn't used to be like this. But a more honest question might be, what were women actually allowed to be? For much of modern history, and in fact previous history, women were legally and economically restricted in ways that limited their independence and options. In many countries, women couldn't open their own bank accounts, they couldn't take out loans or own property without some kind of male permission. And divorce often carried severe financial and social consequences. Many women stayed in marriages not because they were happy or fulfilled or better back then, but because leaving meant losing things like their security, their support, and sometimes even access to their children. And those restrictions are not ancient history. In many places, they existed well into the 20th century. In fact, in some places, it still exists. And when your survival depends on staying quiet, staying small, and staying compliant, you stay that way not because you lack strength, but because the system leaves you very little room for choice. And as laws began to shift and change, and women have started to gain more economic independence, something important has started to shift. Women can earn their own income. They can leave unhealthy and abusive situations. They can organize collectively and they can speak up publicly. And when those structural barriers began to loosen, voices that were previously contained and minimized began to merge. That's why one of the reasons the current moment feels so loud. Women speaking about things like inequality, abuse, unseen emotional labor, and power dynamics are not suddenly creating new problems. We're naming things that have existed for an incredibly long time, but were rarely allowed to be acknowledged openly. And once something is named, it becomes very difficult to ignore. And at the same time, this moment has also created another conversation. If patriarchal systems have produced so much imbalance, would society function better if women were in charge? In fact, I see this conversation happening quite a lot. It's a question that comes up very often, especially when people look at the long history of things like war, economic inequality, and domination that has shaped many patriarchal societies. And some people will argue that women may be better suited to leadership because women often manage stress differently. And they're a little bit more used to navigating complex emotional environments and situations. Others point to indigenous cultures where women do still hold significant influence and communities operate in more cooperative ways. And these discussions matter because they challenge the assumption that patriarchal leadership is the only possible model for us as a society. But it's also important to stay clear about the deeper goal here. The goal is not simply to flip the hierarchy. If women step into the same top-down, dominance-based model of leadership, the structure itself hasn't changed. We still have the same structure. The gender at the top may be different, but the system is still operating in the same way. And what many people are actually responding to here is a desire for a different kind of leadership altogether. Leadership that values things like relationship, cooperation, and long-term well-being alongside things like strategy, expansion, action. And this is where the idea of the feminine rising becomes important. The feminine rising is not simply about women speaking more loudly. It's about bringing feminine qualities back into the way our societies function. Qualities like emotional intelligence, relational awareness, care for community, and responsibility for future generations. These qualities help to stabilize societies because they focus on maintaining balance rather than constantly competing with one another for power. And this is why the moment can feel so loud, so uncomfortable, and very disruptive. When long-standing power structures are questioned, the shift can feel very threatening to the people who are used to those structures, who benefit from those structures. But what we are really witnessing is a society, a global society, beginning to rethink how power works and what kind of leadership will serve us far better moving forward as a global society.